Hello, hello, and welcome everyone to Overtime. It's been an interesting week. Let me double check my audio settings. We're moving all the systems over yet again, and so I'm not as confident in these settings as I could be, but I think we are good. So, and I missed, right, I'm sorry, I missed Joe, and I had invited him in, and I would very much like to have him here. So, Joe, let me send you the link, and we will get you in here. So if everyone could just hang with me for a minute, and that's entirely my fault. So I was the day got ahead of me. So let me this is not going to take too long here. So I want to prepare a link here for Joe. There we are. And then Joe, this will be done just sort of the yeah, there's audio. That's a sign of the apocalypse, I think. So Joe, I'm going to be sending you a link. I will send it. Probably don't have, actually, I suppose we could just connect you through Skype, but for now, I think the easiest and fastest way, without getting too fancy, it would be to just, I will send you through Skype. I will send you a link, and you can use your web browser. Barring that, we'll set up Skype, but that just takes up an extra step or two. So everyone here I invited Joe Serious Mind. I very much enjoy having him on. And my bad, I didn't double check to make sure, and it was on my to-do list. It's been a bit of a crazy day, so hopefully he'll be understanding. I appreciate, Joe, you coming into the live chat to let me know you're here. So what I'm going to do is there's Joe, and there you go. And so Joe, I'm sending you a link that is just should work in any browser and connect you right into the show. So let's move over and make some room for Joe there. And then, let's see, I think, oh, and there he is. That was quick. Wow, that was uncharacteristically, that almost makes it seem like I know what I'm doing. So I'm kind of nervous by that. So I'm going to get him into the program real quick. He's here. Wow is all I have to say. So, and there you are. And you are muted. Cool. I don't know if that's on my end or yours, but I can check on that in a second. It's, let's see. All right. Oh, you know what? No, you're not muted. Well, it's not that you're muted. It's that I've got my own audio issues. I was, like I said, we're switching systems, and I was in the middle of, processing that. There we go. All right. There we go. I should be able to hear you now. How are you?
There we go. Can you hear me?
I can, sir. How are you? Thank you so much for joining us, Excellent.
Joe. Good to see you. Good to see you.
Good to see you. So, Joe, I wanted to do a slightly different pace today, at least for starting. I think we talked about, Israel's going to cover most of today. But I wanted to start with something just because. There was another video that dropped, I think it was today, police body cam footage. This one was a little different, and you have to keep in mind, you know what, police across the country, they know that their image is kind of heading south. So, but, you know, the footage comes out, and the reality is what you're about to see also is an accurate view of police officers. There are many perspectives. This is one that I think merits mentioning. So we're going to put this up in the middle here. And this is a cam taken by a webcam outside. A man had a seizure in his car and got into an accident. And the car caught on fire, but he was unable to get himself out. So this is footage from that. And there's a police officer breaking in through the window. also show that now. Let's see the car. The car is obviously gone completely up. Let's show that now also from. I think I put that in the wrong one. This is the body cam from the officer. So, and I'll say this. I've got, what, this is a news show, and obviously there's been a lot of negative news, but I think it's always nice when you can show some positive news as well. And those are the two officers there. And so two sides to every story. And so I figured we'd show that one.
Not always, but many times.
Well, you're right. Okay. Well, and I think, okay, there's two sides. They're not always being honest. I didn't say that.
Well, this is true. But no, and this is really great to see. And this is the thing. This is, the people who don't want accountability. When they'll look at this and they'll look down the nose of somebody like me who has a big problem with the police and say, well, and basically come up with some negative, like I would not be happy about this or would not give the police credit. No, I mean, those cops did the right thing. They did a good job. So that's great. That's what we want. We want police that are responsive to the community and help the community. And none of us want, with the exception of radicals, none of us want any harm to come to the cops. So this is good.
Yep. Well, and that's why I mean, it's the caveat, of course, which is I'm going to be a little cynical and say that this gets released around the time of all the. But on the reality is those officers did exactly what you would hope they would do. They're heroes in my view. It doesn't mitigate the obvious, just the vast systemic problems we have. But I think it's worth. I think it's worth showing it. I mean, if we got that footage,
absolutely. Well, yeah. In the interest of being fair, certainly we should show good things as well as the bad things. So that's all part of it, because you want to have a fair assessment, right?
Yep. All right. So meanwhile, CNN reported yesterday that Donald Trump has, quote, been getting worse, which it seems like that's kind of a hard, descending deeper into wild conspiracy theories. And they quoted one aide to the former president who claims that, quote, he is more obsessed than ever with the 2020 election and is listening only to the bottom of the crazies in the barrel. This is on the heels of Michael Flynn, who suggested this weekend last weekend, that a Myanmar-style coup should happen in the United States. And reports from both the New York Times and from the Washington Post that Trump now claims that he expects he will be reinstated by August, sometime after the audits of the election are completed. The Post wrote that, quote, Trump has become so fixated on the audits that he suggested recently to allies that their success, of the audits, their success could return him to the White House this year. He has hailed the, quote, great work being done by Georgia in revealing the election fraud of the 2020 presidential election, but we must not allow anyone to compromise these ballots by leaving them unsecured, which was done last Friday. Republicans and patriots must protect these sites and absentee ballots. Flynn, who was asked over the weekend why what happened in Myanmar hasn't happened here, or why it couldn't happen here, and he replied, quote, no reason. I mean, it should happen here. No reason. That's right. Later, Flynn took to Parler and claimed that his statements were taken out of context and wrote, let me be very clear. There is no reason whatsoever for a coup in America. I do not and have not at any time called for any action of that sort. The Republican Party already on the brink of rupture over a new centrist wing, which argues that facts and reality should be the cornerstone of the Republican Party, and that those haven't been since Trump started his bid for the presidency, all now face a new problem. They have endorsed his behavior till now and cannot easily call him out without appearing hypocrites, nor can they continue to endorse him. At the present, it looks like their main strategy is to ignore him, which one editor at CNN described as Homer Simpson's strategy for taking a test. Quote, during the exam, I'll hide under some coats and hope that somehow everything works out. Normally we do a rundown of the whole thing and then go story by story, but I figure we've only got like really two or three small stories today. So let's cover that one and tell me what you think. And you're aware, of course, that there is now a wing, a centrist wing of the Republican Party that is threatening to break off and form their own party. So that and Trump took down his blog, which I didn't have time to really look into and see what was up behind that. But apparently he was publicly, they said, well, it was just sort of a test run to have the blog up. Privately, as I understand it, the claim is that he was getting too few subs and too few views on the blog, so he took it down.
Yeah, apparently there was not a lot of traffic on it, and he doesn't get the psychic feedback too, because a lot of blogs, um, like it's not like a regular forum where people can create stuff and then tag you in there. It's only based on he has to post something, or one of his people have to post something, and then people can reply to that. He doesn't get the same kind of feedback that he got from Twitter, so he doesn't really like it. And it's also work. I mean, it takes no work to do Twitter, and we all joked about him, doing Twitter on the toilet at 2 a.m, which is probably pretty close to true.
It is that ended up being confirmed later on too. Somebody was just like, yeah, it was in the John. I think he did, like on Air Force One. Somebody just said, yeah, I came out of the bathroom. He was still tweeting, but at any rate. Yeah.
Exactly, but we're to do a proper blog it takes actual work, and he's never wanted to do work. He doesn't work, so it's really not the right platform for him. I prefer that he doesn't have any platform, but certainly not. It's not the one that's going to give him the kind of feedback and the kind of feeling out of it, because you just can't whip something off. You can't you can't make blog posts that are 140 characters and have it be a meaningful blog. So he doesn't like that. And the thing is, I am concerned by the radicals in the party getting more and more radical. I mean, Flynn's trying to walk back his comments, but we all heard it. I mean, but he's just trying to get his tit out of the ringer. The funny thing is, this thing about a centrist wing. No, there's a conservative wing that's emerging because
that's a really good point. That is,
yeah.
Thank you for making that point, because that's not unimportant.
Exactly. That's not a centrist wing. They're a conservative wing that's trying to assert itself with what's left of the old Republican Party, while the rest of the Republican Party are radicals. And has been growing more and more radical. I remember a friend back when Bush Jr. was the president, and he made the point that Bush, W, was not a conservative, that he was actually a radical, and they've been moving more and more radical for the last 20, 25 years. So yeah, I guess, I don't generally cotton with conservatism, but I guess I'm happy to see a reality-based wing of the Republican Party, however small it might be.
Well, that's what they said. They said, I was quoting them when they said they wanted a Republican Party that was based on reality. What do you have to make that the platform for splitting off a new party? I just kind of think like, wow.
Yeah. Well, I really hope. I mean, it's funny because they're holding out hope that they can somehow pull the radicals back. I mean, I think that ship has sailed. So I do hope they form a splinter party, because it means that other than like the Trump candidates who have enough Trumpers in their districts, all the rest of them will lose, because the real conservatives, they won't vote for Democrats. But they're not going to vote if they have an option between voting for an actual Republican, and those nutbags. They're going to vote for the conservative, the real conservatives.
So let me ask you this, before we go on. I realized that as I heard about this, about Trump sort of descending even further into madness, one of the things I realized is I haven't really heard him in the news in quite some time, and I have no doubt that he's speaking, but. Part of it, part of it, I suspect, is that the news has been trying to make him a little more obsolete and not talking about him as much. But it also seems like he has been relegated to some form of, what's the word begins with an I that I'm,
irrelevant?
Irrelevance. Thank you. Thank you. I used to speak English, but at any rate, now, I was starting to wonder if, especially with him shutting down the blog, how much his getting banned from Twitter had to do with that because that really was his lifeline into that segment you were talking about. So I'm wondering if we're starting to really see the effects of that. I was curious what your take on that is.
Well, that's the thing that's kind of funny. I mean, Trump is still incredibly relevant to the nutbags within the party apparatus.
Hmm.
They're all going to get his anointment and have him sprinkle the holy water, which is probably laced with urine because but and and go and kiss his ass and kiss the ring and kiss his asshole. Um, but uh, to the rank and file, he's becoming irrelevant. They don't really care. I mean, and what's the other big problem the Republicans are going to have? I mean, they're kind of in a between a rock and a hard place because there are a lot of people who voted for Trump who never gave a crap about the Republican Party. I mean, they might hate Democrats, but they didn't care about the Republicans either. In fact, there was shortly before everyone went down to Florida to kiss his ring. Um, I saw this kind of town hall with some Republicans talking to the rank and file, and one guy stood up and said flat out, he's like, "We don't give a shit about you. I'm not a Republican. I'm a Trumper." And so that's that. So basically, what's ended up happening is these guys, these radicals, they're basically kind of stuck because they feel like they have to keep that base, but that base is not enough to win in most places. And so, unfortunately, what's happening is like the reality-based Republicans are still tending to vote for anything with an R next to their name because they don't want the Democrats. But if that's what I was saying, if these people split off, then the Republican Party, as we know it, will probably crash because even back as recent as like 2014, the Republicans were having a lot of money trouble. And and there was a talk at the time that they could go down, and I didn't think they were going to go down then, but Trump could be the thing that creates such a rift in the party that it actually does do what have they been teetering on for quite some time.
Yeah, well, yeah, I thought it was going to happen with the Tea Party, and it didn't, but it certainly looks like it's threatening to now. Mitch McConnell seems to be aware of it because he's starting to threaten to cut ties. But yeah, that would be comeuppance if he we have. So I'll do a quick plug too for so I hope you guys will join our Discord. I will drop a link for that in a moment. But on our Discord, we have all sorts of interesting stuff, and we keep up with the news. But somebody did put down. I was very tempted to show it. I was like, we'll stay away from it, but. There was a boater or a small group of people boating, and they had a pride flag. And then another boat went around and it was just started hurling slurs at them and just doing donuts around them. And then that boat caught on fire, and they had to bail and get into and they were rescued by the yeah. So yeah, I'm kind of like if something like that happens with the Republican Party, I couldn't be more pleased, to be quite honest.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'll tell you what too, that I don't believe in karma or anything like that, but I'll tell you what, that's about as close to karmic retribution as you're going to find.
I don't. Unfortunately, I don't believe in it either, and I don't think Mitch McConnell is one of the most cynical and evil sons of bitches that I've seen in quite some time. Actually, that has been around in my existence. That I've been diving into politics. He's the worst I've ever seen. I think by no small stretch. He will never get what's coming to him, in my view. But a little something wouldn't hurt.
Well, the thing that gets me, what I don't understand about McConnell and the way he's been behaving, is I get that prior to the 2020 election, and he was going to have to like mind the P's and Q's, and there was this whole talk of him trying to wrest control of the party from Trump. He seems to have, at least for the time being. I mean, he blusters, but at the end of the day, he's still doing the same thing he did under Obama. I'm going to block everything. I'm going to prevent Biden from having anything. And the thing is that he just got reelected. So he was 78 when he got reelected. He just turned 79 in February. He's not running again. This is his last term. Whether he lives throughout the term or not, I just don't see him pulling a Strom Thurmond and running for office at age 84. So I don't understand why he wouldn't try to build a better legacy than being like Mr. No for the last 12 years and running. Actually, the last more than that. The last 12 years running. Probably more than that, but at least that.
I don't. I think he considers. Actually, I'm not sure legacy ever meant anything to him. I think it was the acquisition of power, and I think I think it's more ambitious than Karl Rove, which is saying something.
Yeah.
But all right. Well, so now that sort of our main story, which I think I'm going to break up into sort of what's happening and a very short rundown of the history and why it is, at least to the best of our ability, the way it is. Benjamin Netanyahu has spent 12 years as Prime Minister of Israel. Yesterday, a number of left-wing, centrist, and delusioned right-wing parties came together in a coalition with the intent of ousting the Prime Minister. Parliament has now scheduled a no-confidence vote for next week, and this coalition appears to actually have sufficient votes to overcome the 50% majority needed to unseat him. Under this deal, a even further right nationalist and former defense minister Naftali Bennett would carry out the remaining term and then hand the office over to a centrist, Yair Lapid, at the end of that term, in accordance with this government coalition and the terms that they have settled on. Meanwhile, Benjamin Netanyahu has gone on a full offensive, saying that they do not now, nor will they ever have, sufficient votes to expel him, and going on as to how he is needed, and in this time of crisis, he is the only one who can shepherd the country. Now, the West Bank is a strip of land on the west bank of the Jordan River. It is surrounded on all sides. The West Bank, as the area of land that we are talking about, is surrounded on all sides by Israel. During the 1967 Middle East War, that land, which had been it's sort of de facto Palestine. It's not really a state, but when we talk about Palestine, it's a huge part of what we talk about when we talk about Palestine. A large part of that land was occupied by Israel. Today, somewhere between 2.1 and 3 million Palestinian Arabs live in the West Bank under a patchwork of government and laws, from self-rule to Israeli military authority. The West Bank also shelters nearly 430,000 Israeli Jews in about 260 settlements and outposts built under this occupation. The settlements have often been considered annexation and are thus illegal under international law and considered illegal by most members of the international community, having been built on occupied Palestinian land. Now, there have been previous expansions which have left a patchwork of villages controlled by Israeli military scattered throughout the West Bank territory. This creates problems for people who aren't in those villages because they have to pass through security checks to go from one village to another, sometimes from their home to their work or wherever it is that they're trying to travel. And barricades, secured highways, checkpoints choke off these Palestinian settlements, which make them weaker and, in fact, makes it harder for them to oppose Israeli military if and when they come in. Now, Netanyahu has defended his plan to expand the infiltration into the West Bank. He argued that despite projecting Israeli sovereignty into the West Bank and the Jordan Valley, this is not, in fact, annexation, in part because in all future expansions, Palestinians would still have self-autonomy, meaning they would not actually be ruled by the Israelis. However, if this is true, then it's not really expansion. This would still be the Palestinian land. The only way for Israel to project its sovereignty is to, in fact, say that it owns or is going to control the land in some way or another, which is, in fact, annexation and illegal under international law. Now, he had originally proposed a plan shortly before Trump came into office that would earmark about 3% of the West Bank for further expansion. However, the Palestinians have, of course, objected to this. They have said that this is their land, and Israel is claiming that they have both historical and religious rights to the entire West Bank, which they claim as the ancestral land of the Jewish people. They also claim it for self-defense, especially in the wake of the fact that the vast majority of countries in the Middle East, deny that Israel even exists. and or they also deny Israel's right to exist, and a number of them have gone to war with Israel to eject them from what they consider to be entirely Palestinian land, given the fact that that land that created Israel was created by the UN in an effort to give the Jewish people a homeland, and it was land that was owned. It was, I think, it was in stewardship by the UK, eventually by the UN. They had the authority; they gave them that land, but there were people already living on it. These expansions are going off into the further Palestinian area, which was not given to them by the UN. Now, the annexation has in fact been opposed strongly by most countries, and indeed, in many cases, and we've heard stories of this, where Palestinians will be in their homes. The Israeli government will show up and they will say that, the military will show up and say that there's a bomb threat or there's some kind of military threat, maybe artillery coming in, and they need to evacuate their homes. They evacuate their homes. They then bar them from coming back into their homes and actually give those standing homes, which belonged to Palestinians, to Jewish families. Now, the original expansion plan that Netanyahu offered, I think it was 3 years ago, maybe a little longer, was for 3% of the West Bank to fall under Israeli rule. With Trump's support, he moved that number to 30% of the entire West Bank, with the support of Washington, D.C. Now, one of the other goals here would be to expand or project their control so that Jewish settlements could be built faster. Right now, any building in the West Bank that is not in territory explicitly controlled by Israel has to run through A, the Israeli defense minister, and B, the prime minister, in order to allow the building of these settlements on land that is not in the Israel territory of Israel. Excuse me. However, if Israel expands its territory, then it's a local matter. When somebody wants to make a new home, make a shop, anything like that, you just go to the local government. You don't actually have to go to the prime minister of Israel himself, because the land is now considered occupied territory of Israel. So that, in short, is where we've been right now. What we have, just to reiterate sort of why we went into this history, which I apologize, I rambled there for a bit, but roughly why Netanyahu has had this expansion plan. Biden has now pulled back on it. The U.S. has always been very tenuous about this. Israel is our biggest ally in the Middle East. We have unofficially given them nuclear weapons, making them a nuclear power, also in violation of international law, for them to use as self-defense. This is probably the only reason they still exist and that they haven't been invaded, is they could obliterate any invader. Having said that, we also have a tendency to look the other way as they do things that are considered almost universally violations of international law. Now, Netanyahu has been a bit of a hardliner, and he has been trying to expand these territories. And this is what the last war, which lasted, I think, 9 days, between Gaza and Israel was largely about. And so we're going to have another hardliner. He's going to come in. He's going to come in for about 2 years and then be replaced by a centrist. That is the plan. It looks like this plan will almost certainly succeed, to the extent that, in fact, a number of credible news agencies have actually already said that he has been ousted, which has not, in fact, happened. He is not yet out, but they presumably have what they need to oust him. And we will see what happens. So, Joe, what are your thoughts?
Okay, well, many. Then there's a lot to cover there. The a couple of things, just minor corrections. The Israel actually developed the weapons themselves, but it was just obviously with knowledge-based gain from the United States. We didn't
All
actually
right.
give them the.
Yes.
We didn't build weapons and hand them to them. They built them themselves. Now, the other thing too that I mean, obviously, nobody would accept living under those conditions. Nobody. It's outrageous that Israel does it. And the thing that's upsetting, the most upsetting to me, is that, look, we all understand what happened in the Holocaust was one of the worst things that ever happened in human history. So you would think of people who went through that would be more understanding of what authoritarian rule is like. And so it's very upsetting. And again, especially as I am related to said people, because I am part Ashkenazi myself, it's very upsetting. The other thing too that I find is it's part of the narrative, but it's not true anymore. Um, is that we give all this money to Israel, and that the idea is that, well, if we didn't, like, they just get wiped off the map by all these Arab hordes. Those Arab armies are gone. They're long gone. Between butting, basically, smashing their faces into the Israeli army a number of times, and then just having messed up economies and messed up countries where they haven't really been building their military, and their military's been wearing it, running down. Where then right now the only countries that border them that haven't accepted their right to exist are Lebanon and Syria. Lebanon effectively has no military, or close to it, and Syria's military is in the middle of fighting itself. So the peril to Israel is not what it used to be. But of course, for the people who like to push the narrative, and a lot of it is really just defense contractors who want to make money. But also there's Christian Zionists, and we talked about that before, that they all need the Jews to be in Israel so that Jesus can come back and destroy them and bring the end times. So it's very difficult. People, there are a lot of people who don't have honest motives when they talk about the subject. It makes it very hard to have an honest discussion and really look at what's actually going on. One of the big issues too, you mentioned some of the issues, but one of the big issues is control of the water, because whoever controls the water in the desert, and that's a big problem, is water rights. And that's actually some of the biggest squabbles remaining with Syria. With one of the reasons why Syria has a problem with Israel is really over water rights. Because when Israel occupied the Golan Heights, that they also took control of a lot of the water. It's the other thing too is that, as far as Israel as an ally, it hasn't really worked out that way. Because if you look at the wars we fought in the last 30 years in the Middle East, we couldn't use Israeli territory to shuttle troops, to launch attacks, to bring cargo or anything like that. So the times we've actually needed them for that purpose, that hasn't actually panned out. Now, that's not a reason not to support them, but it just, again, it's part of the narrative that's false. Israel has of no strategic value to the United States. The reason to support them is that they're a country, they exist, and they have the right to exist. It's a moral argument, but people prefer to make the phony, they're our big ally. They're not. They spy on us all the time. And unfortunately, because we've been a dishonest broker as a country in the region, and we lack credibility, what's happened is that basically people we've become a proxy for their anger at Israel. So a lot of what's happened, the hostility that the Arab countries have toward the United States has to do with the way we support Israel, because we should, as an ally, be able to tell them if they're violating the law, say, hey, look, you're still my bud. I'm still gonna support you, but you have to stop. You have to stop breaking the rules, because you lose credibility, and then we lose credibility. Plus, those half the weapons you're firing at the enemy say "Made in USA" on them, and that hurts us too. So we got to come to some accommodation here. Now, as far as getting Netanyahu out, that'll be one of the best things that's happened in this century. And I'm not even, and that's not hyperbole.
That was
That's not
going to be my next
hyperbole in the
question.
least.
So, yeah, okay,
That's
perfect.
not
Yeah,
that is not hyperbole, because if you look back at what happened in the end of last century, when you had Itzhak Rabin, who had made peace with Arafat, and things were working. It wasn't perfect, because the problem is always, if you make the standard there can't be any violence, then all it takes is one or two radicals to go out there and cause problems. And Rabin understood this, and he was like, well, all right, we're not going to hold 100%, the other 99% of Palestinians responsible for what the 1% that are causing problems. And he had credibility because he was really their greatest war leader. He had, it was kind of like only Nixon could go to China, only Rabin could make peace. And unfortunately, because of that, it was actually radicals on his side that actually killed him. It wasn't Arabs that killed him, because the Arabs needed him. And I remember when he was killed, I remember Arafat was really shaken. He was really upset because he knew what was coming. And Shimon Peres was not a good leader. He was just milquetoast. And that's what allowed the Likud party and Netanyahu to get in the first place in the 90s. And if you remember, basically when the Likud party came in, Netanyahu and the Likud party basically said that the peace accord that had been negotiated, well, that didn't apply to this government. That was a previous government. And they basically started like abrogating the treaty. And that's when the Intifada started. And so I've always hated Netanyahu. He is a thug, and he's the worst thing that ever happened to Israel. He's the worst thing that ever happened to Middle East peace. So the fact that they're drumming him out is one of the best things that's happened, because, like I said, I think Yitzhak Rabin getting killed when he did was actually literally the worst. That was the worst day of the 20th century.
Well, and then I remember because Perez was so, yeah, and you said I think like he was like toast. Did you say like
Milk toast? He's kind of wishy-washy and.
Well, and I'm curious if that was. I suspect that was really his nature, but somebody had accused him later of failing to take the opportunity to pick up the mantle and finish what had been started. And he said, if I had done any of the things that we had promised, I would be sipping tea with Isaac.
But again, that shows a lack. But that also shows a lack of leadership, because Rabin knew what the danger was, but he understood how important it was, and he was a hero, and he was willing to put himself on the line. And unfortunately, what happened. But that's the thing. Perez was not willing to go to the mat for peace. So so while Netanyahu and his bunch are the ones who did all the bad stuff, I lay at least some culpability on Perez for not picking up the mantle and running with it, because we might be in a better position than we are now.
So the initial, assuming that this is going to happen, which I think everyone has taken as a foregone conclusion, I don't think that's wise. Sometimes you never know, and Netanyahu does strike me as reasonably resourceful, and he seems to think he's got an ace up his sleeve. Now, a lot of people in his position think that, and they usually are wrong. But you never know. But assuming that this happens, initially the former defense minister, Naftali Bennett, who is to the right of of Netanyahu, is going to be taking over, and he's going to have 2 years. Now, it is the far right position to say that they should be taking over more and more control of the West Bank. Now, we do have Biden in office. Ostensibly, he's going to be doing largely what you recommended. Certainly, that was what Obama advocated for, which was saying, "Look, we're buddies, and that's why we have to tell you you can't be doing this." I don't know anything about Naftali. Do you know who he is? What do you think is going to happen when they install, at least for 2 years, somebody who's even further to the right of Rabin, who, by the way, was, I think one of the reasons he's in trouble, I think he was going to get in trouble no matter what. There are enough people pissed at him. But one of the reasons that the far right is on board with this is because they think he ended the war, the most recent war in Gaza, too early. So are you at all concerned about this, and what are you expecting?
Yeah, I mean, anytime you have a far right person, and like I said, I mean, Netanyahu was the face of the Likud party, but he wasn't the only person that was making things go bad. Now, the thing about it is, because it's a coalition government, that will limit him to a degree, because if he goes too far, the coalition falls apart. And then there's new elections, and if if people feel that he didn't live up to his end of the agreement, then he's going to be out, and so's Likud, which would, so I think that could be potentially a win-win if you think about it. But because basically either Likud's out or he toes the line enough to keep the centrists and the liberals from bolting. Um,
And this is something we're
so
going to please.
no, that was it.
This is something we've covered civics a lot on In Time. We've had a lot of episodes on various civics things. One thing we haven't covered is how parliaments work and how the British Parliament works and how this parliament system works. Because I think to most Americans, the idea that you form a government, they're like, what the hell does that mean? There are seats, you sit in the chairs. That's government formed. They've been elected. They go. And it doesn't quite work that way. And the idea that they can recall their prime minister or that their prime minister is a product of the government is a difficult thing to understand. Now, this coalition, as long as it holds, has the votes to be able to do this. But I did note that it's mostly left wing and centrists and the disillusioned right wing. So they make up the sort of smaller segment of it. So it sounds like you're suggesting, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, that they probably have at least some kind of plan with him for what that 2 years is going to look like. It's probably a reasonably moderate plan. And if he violates that, then the coalition falls apart. But what that really means, it doesn't mean Netanyahu comes back in. It just means there's a whole new round of, okay. That's
yeah, and you're right. A lot of people, well, mostly Americans, because I think most of the other major Western countries have parliaments. But for anyone who doesn't know, when you in the parliamentary systems, generally speaking, you don't vote for the leader. The party votes for their leader, and with a party that has the majority, puts their leader up as the prime minister. Now, in the case that nobody has a majority, then you have to form a coalition. So, in which case, one or more parties I should say two or more parties will get together, and then if they collectively have the majority, then they can form a government, which means you can actually have a minority government, meaning that you could have a bunch of parties that were each individually in the minority, but together form a majority. So none of them are the most popular party, but together they're more popular than the one that was most popular, and form a government.
The plurality one, yeah.
Yeah. So that, and those tend to be more precarious because, again, there's less. Each of the players are smaller, so it can fall apart a lot more easily. But that's kind of what's happening here. Well, actually, no. This is actually all the parties in a way. So this is almost a unit. This is almost a unity government.
Yeah,
I think the only thing it leaves out, I think, are it's the far right religious party. There's some of one of the things that's kind of interesting in Israeli politics that's kind of hard to fathom is that there are, if you go really, really super right wing, they're actually anti-Zionist.
Really?
There are Jewish sects of like ultra radical right wingers that they're messed. I think they're messed up. They actually think that the Holocaust was punishment for something, and they're anti-Zionist. It's weird. You wouldn't think that would be the case, but they exist. They're small. They're not nowhere near them. They're not even a plurality, but they exist. It's very strange.
Well, yes, please.
No, I was going to say the thing that's messed up here, as I said before, our far right, the radicals in our country, they're very pro-Israel and they're very anti-Jew. It's the weirdest thing you could ever find.
That's an interesting observation. I tend to concur. I think you're probably right. I think that's a good observation. Well, I like
they're the same ones. They're the same one out there with Nazi flags and KKK flags and Jews will not replace us and all this bullshit.
Well, that was what was it they said to Joe the plumber when they were talking to Joe the plumber who was stumping for McCain, and he was basically a fabrication in and of himself. But somebody had said, "Well, a vote for Obama is a death to Israel," and he was like, "Oh, I couldn't agree more." And you got the impression that he probably had some anti-Semitic and or racist leanings, but he was also pro-Israel. And I think that gets back to what you had said earlier, which is there is this very strong conception that they are the linchpin to our being able to withstand in the Middle East because they're our strongest ally there, which they are our strongest ally there. But we've bought off the Royal House of Saud, and they're an ally if for no other reason than we keep them in power by giving them guns and gunnies, guns and guns and yeah.
Muns and Gunny.
Muns and gunny. Okay, well, okay. We're gonna somebody timestamp this one. I'm gonna just like do a little cut, and I didn't say that.
They took our muns.
They took our muns. I like that one. Oh dear Lord. So we do have other allies. They're all bought off, but Israel on some level. I mean, we're using them, and they're bought off. Each side seems to acknowledge this. And I don't want to detract from the fact that there are. I think most Americans do genuinely believe that the Jewish people need their own state. So, but that's another very good observation that I think strategically they're not as important as we tend to make them out to be. But the people who buy into that sit there and say, okay, without Israel, the entire Middle East unites under one caliphate flag and comes and destroys the rest of the planet Earth, I think is the general consensus. And I don't see any evidence for that.
Well, that's the thing, because, I mean, it seems to me that at least earlier on when those Arab armies still existed, if anything, they became a lightning rod that actually rallied the Arab world. I remember I used to work with a woman who was from Jordan, and I wanted to get her perspective because I only ever heard, and it was funny because she was like, this Arab Brotherhood. She says, no, we don't. He says, we don't even like she's like the east of Jordan doesn't even like the west of Jordan. Like, what are you talking about? And she didn't have any truck with the Palestinians because she's like, what homeland? They live in, it's called Jordan. They're like 70% of the population, So she was kind of fed up with the whole thing. It's people have framed things, and because we're largely ignorant of it, it's easy to fall prey to the framing. And like I said, some of it may have been true at one time, but it really isn't anymore. I had a conversation with a friend recently, and he was like, really? And I just started going down the list of what military hardware the various Arab countries have and how many tanks and planes and the whole deal, how many soldiers under arms. And I'm like, well, Egypt and Israel get along to the point that they actually run war games together every year. It's called Bright Star, or most years. There's been gaps, but they do it fairly often. So Egypt, which is the biggest player, they're if not allied, at least non-belligerent. Jordan is friendly to Israel, again, or at least non-belligerent. And Lebanon is irrelevant because they've been war torn for 4 decades, and they don't have any military power. And Syria is in the middle of tearing itself apart. Iraq doesn't have power projection anymore, and Iran's not going to go through Iraq to get to Israel. So
no, and Iran would absolutely rather go after Iraq anyway. I mean that they've been at it for what, 3,000 years, really, the Persians and the Arabs. I mean that's been out there for a while. All right. Well, so any last thoughts before we go? I think that just about wraps it up. And
I guess. Well, it'll be interesting to see what happens. I think that and it'll be interesting to see what it does to politics here in the U.S. because I think that's going to be more telling in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to. I mean, Netanyahu is I am not studied enough on Netanyahu to be able to say with the confidence that you did that he is so horrible. That's been kind of my suspicion based on looking at it. I'm sitting there going like, wow, he really seems like kind of a bad guy, an evil guy. And so to have somebody who's studied this far more than me say that, I was like, yeah, I called it. Didn't actually call it, but we'll say I did. We can retcon that.
You were on the right track.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, Joe, thank you very much for showing up, and I apologize for I got your message right here. I was just like, it was just very hectic in the last few minutes leading up to the show, and I'm really glad you reached out.
No worries.
So Thank you.
Yeah, no, I was glad to be part of it, and thanks for letting me in.
Anytime. We got a couple of other things going on, and so for tomorrow, actually, we're going to do a call-in show with Neil 604 Atheist. That'll be on In Time, and I'm thinking aside from calling in, we may also just have a chat. I don't know. We're still sorting it out, but Neil's going to be on board 6 p.m. tomorrow. So, if you want to
Okay.
come in and shoot the shit with Neil and us, let me know. I'll make sure that you get in. So. But in the meantime, thank you all for joining us, and thank you for joining us here on Overtime. Remember, the main channel is actually In Time. I think probably all of you know that. That's where you came from. But if you feel like if you've enjoyed this thus far, please hit the like and subscribe button and hit the bell. That's how we get up in the algorithm. We're still trying to build this channel. In Time has an established brand and is built, but over time we're still trying to pick that up a bit. But other than that, I'm gonna try to pop in the Discord later. Like I said, things are a little crazy, but we got the show done. So, and I look forward to catching up with all of you tomorrow when we have on Neil 604 Atheist, and then Native Atheist. This is part of In Time. The whole somebody explain it to him because he's okay. And then someone explain it to me because I'm not sure how I totally get. But at any rate, Neil 604 Atheist, and then Anthony Magnavasco the week after that, and then Christian Atheism and Post-Theism the week after that. And we may have a few surprises in between then. Until then, my name is Nick Soutter. With me today, Joe Serious Mind. Joe, where can people find you?
My Serious Mind channel spelled as I guess they can't see it. I'll type my name in the. I'll just say something. This is me. There, and on Saturday evenings, I am on the Breakfast Club channel, the one that got that funk started a few years ago. We have a hangout every Saturday night. He's out of town, so I'm actually the moderator for the next few weeks. So that's fun, and I'm not really anywhere else. I don't really do Discord or Twitter or any of that stuff. But those are the two places you'll find me.
My 10-year-old daughter loves the fact that I stream, and she wants to be on Daddy's streams and all this other things. And so they're going like, that's kind of, it's trying to be nice, but sitting there going like, they don't usually let kids go on. You can, but this is a different thing. And she said, well, let's play games. Oh, so she wants us to play like first person shooters or whatever, where we're co-playing games, and she's gonna be my co-host. And I was just like, well, I would, but would have to come up with a name for the show. Would have to be on brand. And she's like, Daddy, it's playtime. Son of a bitch.
There you go.
So playtime. So we actually streamed a couple just to a private little thing, and she loves it. So anyways, all right. Thank you all for joining us, and we will catch you guys tomorrow. Have a good night all.
All right, take care.